The evening air was cold when Lily stepped off the bus and started walking toward the restaurant. Her feet hurt from standing all day at her morning job, but she couldn't afford to be late. Not tonight, not ever, really. She had bills to pay and a small apartment to keep, and every shift mattered more than anyone could understand. La Belle Étoile was the kind of place Lily never imagined she would work at. It was fancy. The kind of fancy where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly grocery budget. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths covered every table. Wealthy people came here to celebrate anniversaries, close business deals, and show off their money. And Lily? She was just the girl who brought them their food and smiled even when they didn't bother to look at her face. She had been working there for almost 8 months now. 8 months of carrying heavy trays, memorizing complicated orders, and pretending she didn't notice when customers talked about her like she wasn't standing right there. Most of the guests were polite enough, some were even kind, but others treated the staff like furniture, like they were part of the decoration rather than real people with real lives. Tonight was going to be one of those nights. She could feel it the moment she walked through the back door and saw her manager pacing near the kitchen. "Private event," he said, without even greeting her. "Very important guest. Vincent Caldwell. You know who that is?" Lily shook her head. Her manager sighed like she had just admitted she didn't know what water was. "He's one of the richest investors in the country. Hotels, tech companies, real estate. The man owns half the city, and tonight, he's celebrating some big deal with his associates. Everything has to be perfect. Understand?" Lily nodded and tied her apron. Perfect. That word followed her everywhere in this place. Perfect presentation. Perfect timing. Perfect silence. She had learned how to be invisible in a room full of people who didn't want to see her anyway. The restaurant filled up quickly that evening. Vincent Caldwell arrived around 7 with a group of 6 others, all dressed in expensive suits and designer dresses. He was a tall man in his early 60s with silver hair and a sharp jaw. His watch probably cost more than everything Lily owned combined. He walked like he expected the world to move out of his way. And honestly, it usually did. His table was the largest one in the center of the room, right next to the grand piano that sat in the corner. That piano. Lily had noticed it on her very first day. It was a Steinway, sleek and black, polished until it reflected the chandelier lights like a mirror. She had stopped in her tracks when she first saw it, and stared for a moment too long. Her manager had caught her looking and quickly explained that only professional musicians hired for special occasions were allowed to play it. No one else. Especially not the staff. Lily had nodded and never mentioned it again. But every night, when she passed by that piano, her fingers would twitch just a little. Old habits. Old memories. A different life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. She had trained for 12 years. 12 years of lessons, recitals, competitions, and dreams of concert halls. Her mother used to sit in the front row at every performance, crying happy tears. Her father used to joke that Lily's fingers were magic, and that one day she would play for kings and queens. They believed in her more than she ever believed in herself. But then everything fell apart. Her father got sick. The medical bills piled up like a mountain they could never climb. They sold the house first. Then the car. Then the piano. The beautiful upright piano that had been in their family for 2 generations. Lily dropped out of the conservatory to work full-time. She took any job she could find. Retail, cleaning, waitressing, whatever paid the bills and kept food on the table. Her father passed away 3 years ago. Her mother moved in with relatives in another city. And Lily stayed behind, working and surviving, trying not to think too much about what could have been. Now she was 26 years old, carrying plates of steak and lobster for people who had more money than they knew what to do with. Life was funny that way. Cruel, but funny. She approached Vincent Caldwell's table carefully, balancing a tray of appetizers on one hand. His group was loud, laughing at jokes that weren't really funny, clinking glasses every few minutes like they were celebrating the fact that they existed. Vincent himself barely acknowledged the staff. When Lily placed his plate in front of him, he didn't look up, didn't say thank you, just kept talking about some company he was planning to buy. That was fine. Lily was used to it. She had learned not to expect anything from people like him. The evening went on. Courses came and went. Lily moved between tables like a ghost. Quiet and efficient. She had gotten good at this. At being present, but not seen. At smiling without feeling anything behind it. It was a survival skill she had developed over the years. Around 9 o'clock, a hired pianist arrived to play background music for the private event. He was a young man in a tuxedo, who looked nervous as he sat down at the Steinway. Lily watched him from across the room as he started playing a simple classical piece. He was decent. Not great, but decent. His timing was a little off in places, and he seemed stiff, like he was afraid to make a mistake. Lily turned away and kept working. It wasn't her place to judge. She was just a waitress now. The piano was just a piece of furniture she walked past every night. But sometimes, late at night when the restaurant was empty and she was wiping down tables alone, she would let herself sit on that bench. Just for a moment. She never played. She didn't dare, but she would rest her fingers on the keys without pressing them, close her eyes, and remember what it felt like to make music, to feel something beautiful coming out of her own hands. Those moments were private, secret, a tiny piece of her old self that she kept hidden from the world. Tonight, as she watched the pianist struggle through a Chopin piece she could have played in her sleep, Lily felt that familiar ache in her chest, the one that reminded her of everything she had lost. She pushed it down like she always did and picked up another tray. Vincent Caldwell laughed loudly at something one of his guests said, and the sound echoed through the restaurant. He raised his glass and made a toast about success and power and winning. His friends cheered. Lily kept her head down and kept moving. She had no idea that by the end of this night, everything was about to change. That the man who hadn't even bothered to look at her face would soon be staring at her in complete shock. That the piano she had been too afraid to touch would become the thing that changed her life forever. But that moment hadn't come yet. For now, she was still invisible. Still just the waitress in the background. And no one in that restaurant had any idea what she was truly capable of. The night was moving along smoothly. Too smoothly, Lily thought. In her experience, when things were going well at the restaurant, something always happened to ruin it. A spilled drink, a wrong order, a guest who decided the steak wasn't cooked exactly how they wanted. She had learned to expect the unexpected and to stay on her toes no matter what. Vincent Caldwell's table was getting louder as the hours passed. The wine kept flowing, and his guests were clearly enjoying themselves. They talked about money and investments and vacation homes in places Lily had only seen in magazines. One woman at the table was showing off a diamond bracelet her husband had just bought her. Another man was bragging about a yacht he was having built somewhere overseas. Lily tried not to listen. It wasn't her business. She was there to serve, not to have opinions. But sometimes it was hard not to notice how different their world was from hers. These people spent more on a single dinner than she made in a month. They complained about problems she would have been grateful to have. Still, she kept her smile in place and did her job. Around 10 o'clock, the main courses were being served. The kitchen was busy, and the staff was moving quickly between tables. Lily was carrying a tray with 3 plates of the chef's special, a dish that cost nearly $200 per serving. She had to weave carefully between the tables to reach the guests who had ordered it. The path took her right past Vincent Caldwell's table. She was being careful. She always was. But the restaurant was crowded that night, and the space between tables was tight. As she passed behind Vincent's chair, someone at the next table suddenly pushed their chair back without looking. Lily had to shift quickly to avoid a collision, and in doing so, her elbow lightly brushed against the back of Vincent's chair. It was barely a touch, so light that most people wouldn't have even noticed. But Vincent Caldwell was not most people. He turned around sharply, his face twisting into an expression of pure annoyance. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. Lily froze. "I'm so sorry, sir. Someone pushed their chair back and I had to." "I don't want excuses," Vincent cut her off. His voice was loud enough that nearby tables started turning to look. Is it really that difficult to walk in a straight line? This is supposed to be a high-class establishment, and they have clumsy staff bumping into guests? Lily felt her cheeks grow hot. It won't happen again, sir. I apologize. But Vincent wasn't finished. He seemed to enjoy the attention now that people were watching. He set down his wine glass and looked at her with cold, dismissive eyes. You know what the problem is with places like this? They hire anyone these days. No standards, no training, just random people off the street who can barely do the simplest tasks. One of the men at his table laughed nervously, not sure if it was a joke or not. The woman with the diamond bracelet looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Lily stood there, her tray still balanced in her hands, wishing she could disappear. She had dealt with rude customers before. It came with the job, but something about the way Vincent was looking at her, like she was less than human, made this feel different. Worse. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience, she said quietly, keeping her voice steady even though her hands wanted to shake. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. She started to turn away, hoping that would be the end of it. But then Vincent noticed something. His eyes drifted past her for a moment, landing on the grand piano in the corner. The hired pianist was taking a short break, and the bench was empty. When Vincent looked back at Lily, there was a cruel smile forming on his lips. Wait a moment, he said. I saw you earlier. You kept looking at that piano. What's the matter? You think you could do better than the guy they hired? Lily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't answer. Vincent leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. Oh, this is interesting. The waitress thinks she's a musician. He glanced around at his guests, inviting them to share in the joke. Let me guess, you took a few lessons as a kid and now you think you're some kind of artist? His friends chuckled, though some of them looked awkward about it. They could tell this was uncomfortable, but no one was brave enough to stop him. Lily's grip tightened on her tray. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him that she had spent 12 years of her life at the piano, that she had won competitions and performed in recital halls, that music had been her entire world before life took everything away from her. But what was the point? He wouldn't believe her. And even if he did, he wouldn't care. To him, she was just a waitress. Just someone to look down on. Her past, her dreams, her talent, none of it mattered to people like him, so she stayed silent. Vincent took her silence as confirmation that he was right. He shook his head and waved his hand dismissively. Stick to carrying plates, sweetheart. That's more your speed. Leave the piano to people who actually know what they're doing. The words hit Lily like a punch to the chest. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because they touched something deep inside her. A wound that had never fully healed. The part of her that still mourned the life she had lost. The music she had been forced to give up. She nodded once, turned around, and walked away. The rest of the room slowly returned to their conversations. The moment already forgotten by most. Just another rich man being rude to the staff. Nothing unusual. Nothing worth remembering. But Lily remembered. She delivered the plates to the table that had ordered them, then excused herself, and walked quickly to the back hallway near the kitchen. There was a small storage room there where the staff sometimes went to take a breath when things got overwhelming. She slipped inside, closed the door behind her, and finally let herself feel everything she had been holding back. Her hands were shaking now. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She leaned against the wall and took slow, deep breaths, trying to calm herself down. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. She had worked so hard her whole life. She had sacrificed everything for her family. And now she was being mocked by a man who had probably never struggled for anything in his entire existence. But what could she do? She was just a waitress now. That was the reality. The piano was part of her past, not her future. Dreams didn't pay bills. Talent didn't matter if you had no opportunity to use it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and took one more deep breath. Then she straightened her apron, fixed her hair, and walked back out to the dining room. There was still work to do. Tables to serve. Smiles to fake. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not here. Not now. But as she passed by the piano on her way back to the floor, she let her fingers brush lightly against its polished surface. Just for a second. Just to remind herself that it was still there. That some part of who she used to be was still alive, even if she had to keep it hidden. She didn't know it yet, but the universe was about to give her a chance she never expected. A chance to show Vincent Caldwell and everyone else in that room exactly who she really was. But for now, she went back to work, invisible once again, carrying the weight of a humiliation that would soon turn into something else entirely. Something powerful, something unforgettable. About 30 minutes had passed since the incident with Vincent Caldwell. Lily had returned to the floor and continued working like nothing had happened. That was the thing about being in the service industry. You didn't get to have feelings on the clock. You smiled, you served, and you saved your emotions for later, when no one was watching. The hired pianist had returned from his break and was playing soft jazz in the corner. The atmosphere in the restaurant had mellowed out. Guests were finishing their desserts, sipping coffee, enjoying the last part of their expensive evenings. Vincent's table was still the loudest in the room, but even they had calmed down a little. Lily was clearing plates from a nearby table when she noticed something strange. The pianist had stopped playing. She glanced over and saw him standing up from the bench, his face pale and sweaty. He was gripping his stomach and looked like he was about to be sick. One of the other waiters rushed over to check on him. A quiet conversation followed, and then the pianist was being helped toward the back of the restaurant. Lily watched him go, a knot forming in her stomach. Something was wrong. A few minutes later, her manager appeared from the back hallway. His face was tight with stress, and he was rubbing his forehead like he was trying to push away a headache. He pulled a few staff members aside and spoke in a low, urgent voice. "The pianist is sick, food poisoning or something. He can't continue." One of the servers frowned. "Can't he push through? It's just background music." The manager shook his head. "He's in the bathroom right now. Trust me, he's not coming back out there tonight. I already called our backup, but he's across town at another event. He can't get here for at least an hour." Lily stood nearby, listening but not saying anything. Her heart was beating a little faster than usual, though she wasn't sure why. The manager looked out at the dining room, his eyes landing on Vincent Caldwell's table. "This is a disaster. Caldwell specifically requested live piano music all night. If we don't have someone playing, he's going to throw a fit. You know how these rich guys are. Everything has to be perfect, or they act like the world is ending." The servers exchanged nervous glances. No one had a solution. And then, before Lily even realized what she was doing, she heard her own voice. "I can play." The words came out quiet, almost like a whisper, but her manager heard them. He turned to look at her, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "What did you say?" Lily swallowed hard. Part of her wanted to take it back, to pretend she hadn't said anything. But another part of her, a part she had kept buried for years, refused to stay silent. "I said I can play the piano. I can fill in until the backup arrives." Her manager stared at her like she had just spoken in a foreign language. "You play piano?" "Since when?" "Since I was a kid. I trained for 12 years. I went to a conservatory before I had to drop out." The other staff members were looking at her now too, equally surprised. Lily had never talked about her past with any of them. She had kept that part of herself locked away, hidden behind the uniform and the polite smile. Her manager rubbed his chin, clearly unsure. "Lily, I don't know. This is a big event. If something goes wrong." "It won't," she said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "I know what I'm doing. Just give me a chance." Before her manager could respond, a loud voice cut through the air. "What's going on over here? Why did the music stop?" It was Vincent Caldwell. He had noticed the empty piano bench and was now walking toward the group of staff members, his expression annoyed. His guests followed behind him, curious about the commotion. The manager straightened up and tried to look calm. "I apologize, Mr. Caldwell. Our pianist became ill suddenly. We're arranging for a replacement right now." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "A replacement? When?" "I specifically requested live music for this event." "This is unacceptable." "I understand, sir. We're doing everything we can to—" "Wait a minute." Vincent's gaze shifted to Lily, and a slow, mocking smile spread across his face. "Is that the waitress from earlier? The one who thinks she can play piano?" Lily felt the eyes of everyone nearby turn to her. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. Vincent laughed, a cold and condescending sound. "Oh, this is too good. She actually volunteered, didn't she?" The clumsy little waitress wants to save the day. Some of his guests chuckled nervously. Others just looked uncomfortable. Vincent stepped closer to Lily, looking down at her with amusement. "Tell you what. Let her play. I could use some entertainment." The manager hesitated. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm not sure that's—" No, I insist." Vincent was clearly enjoying himself now. He pulled out his phone and started recording. "This is going to be hilarious. Go ahead, sweetheart. Show us what you've got. I want to capture this moment for posterity." Lily's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct told her to back down, to apologize, and walk away. She could see the doubt on her manager's face, the amusement on Vincent's, the curious stares of everyone in the restaurant. They all expected her to fail, and maybe she would. Maybe her fingers had forgotten everything after all these years. Maybe she would sit down at that piano and embarrass herself in front of everyone. Maybe Vincent was right about her, but then she thought about her father, about how he used to call her fingers magic, about how her mother would cry happy tears at every recital, about all those years of practice and dedication and love for something beautiful. She thought about the piano they had to sell, the dreams she had to bury, the life she had lost. And she realized something important. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being looked down on, tired of pretending that the girl who loved music didn't exist anymore. Maybe this was foolish. Maybe it would blow up in her face. But for the first time in years, she felt something spark inside her chest, something that had been asleep for too long. Hope. She looked at Vincent, then at her manager, then at the beautiful Steinway piano waiting in the corner of the room. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll play." Vincent grinned and gestured dramatically toward the piano. "By all means. The stage is yours." Lily untied her apron and handed it to a coworker. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she forced herself to walk forward. Every step felt heavy. Every eye in the restaurant was on her now. She could hear whispers spreading through the room as guests realized something unusual was happening. When she reached the piano, she stood there for a moment, just looking at it. The polished black surface, the ivory keys. It was the most beautiful thing she had seen in years. She sat down slowly on the bench and adjusted her position. The seat felt familiar, like coming home after a long time away. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her skin. Behind her, she could hear Vincent chuckling to his friends. She could hear the doubt in the silence of the room. She could feel everyone waiting for her to fail, but she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. And in that moment, she wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a musician. She was the girl her father believed in, and she was about to show everyone exactly who she was. Her fingers hovered over the keys. The room held its breath, and then she began to play. The first note rang out like a bell in the silence. It was soft, gentle, almost hesitant, like someone dipping their toe into water after years of staying dry. But then the second note followed, and the third, and suddenly, something shifted in the air. Lily's fingers began to move across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had spent the last several years carrying plates instead of playing concertos. The melody she chose was Chopin's Ballade No. 1-inch G minor, one of the most difficult and emotionally complex pieces ever written for piano. It was the kind of piece that separates beginners from masters, the kind that requires not just technical skill but heart and soul. And Lily had all three. The music filled the restaurant like water filling a glass. It started slowly, building gently, each note placed with perfect precision. The opening phrases were melancholy, almost sad, telling a story of loss and longing without using any words. At first, The guests weren't sure what to make of it. Some of them had expected a disaster. They had seen Vincent mocking this young waitress, had heard him laughing about how entertaining her failure would be. They had prepared themselves for something awkward and embarrassing. But this was neither of those things. This was something else entirely. One by one, conversations around the room began to fade. Forks were set down, wine glasses were lowered, people turned in their seats to look at the young woman sitting at the piano. Her eyes closed, her body swaying gently with the rhythm of the music. Vincent Caldwell was still holding up his phone, still recording. But the smirk on his face was starting to fade. His eyes were narrowing, not in amusement anymore, but in confusion. This wasn't what he had expected. This wasn't supposed to happen. The piece grew more intense. Lily's fingers danced faster now, moving up and down the keyboard in patterns that seemed almost inhuman. The notes tumbled over each other like waves crashing against rocks, building toward something powerful and inevitable. A woman at a nearby table put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were glistening with tears. She didn't know why she was crying. She didn't even particularly like classical music, but something about the way this girl was playing reached inside her chest and squeezed her heart. She wasn't the only one. Across the room, an elderly man who had been celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary with his wife reached over and took her hand. They had been together for half a century, through good times and bad. And somehow this music reminded them of all of it. The joy, the pain, the love that had carried them through everything. The waiters and kitchen staff had stopped working. They stood frozen near the edges of the room, watching their co-worker transform into someone they had never seen before. The manager, who had been so worried about the evening being ruined, now stood with his mouth slightly open, unable to look away. Lily herself was lost in the music. She wasn't thinking about Vincent anymore. She wasn't thinking about the years of struggle or the dreams she had given up. She wasn't even thinking about the people watching her. In this moment, she was somewhere else entirely. She was back in her childhood home, practicing for hours, while her father read the newspaper nearby. She was on stage at her first recital, nervous but excited, seeing her mother's proud smile in the front row. She was every version of herself that had ever loved this feeling, the feeling of creating something beautiful out of nothing but keys and air. The piece reached its climax, a thunderous section that demanded everything from the performer. Lily's hands flew across the piano, with an intensity that seemed almost violent. Yet every note was perfectly controlled. The sound filled the entire restaurant, bouncing off the walls and ceiling, surrounding everyone in a cocoon of pure emotion. And then, just as suddenly as it had built up, the music began to soften again. The storm passed. The final section of the piece was tender and bittersweet, like the end of a long journey, like saying goodbye to someone you love. Like finding peace after years of pain. The last few notes hung in the air, delicate as snowflakes. And then, silence. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The entire restaurant was frozen in time, still caught in the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then someone started clapping. It was just one person at first, a woman near the back of the room who couldn't contain herself any longer. But then, another person joined in. And another, and suddenly, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. People were standing up from their tables. They were cheering. Some of them were wiping tears from their eyes. The sound of their appreciation filled the room, louder than the music had been, washing over Lily like a warm wave. She opened her eyes slowly, almost like she was waking up from a dream. For a moment, she seemed confused by all the noise and attention. Then she looked around at the standing ovation, at the faces full of amazement and admiration, and something broke open inside her. She had done it. She had really done it. A small, disbelieving smile spread across her face. Her eyes were wet. But she wasn't sad. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. Like the girl who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. Like the daughter who had made her parents so proud. Across the room, Vincent Caldwell stood completely still. His phone was still raised, still recording, but his face was a mask of shock. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man who had just watched the impossible happen right in front of his eyes. His guests were applauding with everyone else, glancing at him with uncomfortable expressions. They had all heard his cruel comments earlier. They had all watched him mock this young woman and predict her failure. And now they had witnessed her prove him spectacularly wrong. One of the women at his table, an elegant lady in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, was looking at Lily with particular interest. She wasn't just impressed. She was fascinated. While everyone else was simply enjoying the moment, this woman was studying Lily like she was a rare gem that had just been discovered in an unexpected place. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. Lily didn't know what to do with herself. She had never been good at accepting praise. She stood up awkwardly from the piano bench and gave a small, shy bow. This only made the audience clap louder. Finally, the noise began to die down. People returned to their seats, still buzzing with excitement, talking to each other about what they had just experienced. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely transformed. It was electric now, alive with energy and wonder. Lily walked away from the piano on shaky legs. Her co-workers surrounded her immediately, hugging her and congratulating her. Her manager looked like he still couldn't believe what had happened. He kept shaking his head and saying the same thing over and over. I had no idea. I had no idea. But Lily barely heard any of it. She was still floating somewhere above herself, not quite back to reality yet. The music was still echoing in her mind, and the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers was still tingling in her hands. She glanced over at Vincent Caldwell's table. He was sitting down now, staring at his phone screen, watching the video he had just recorded. The video he had started to capture her humiliation had instead captured something extraordinary. And from the look on his face, he knew it. Their eyes met for just a moment. Lily didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She just looked at him calmly, then turned away. She didn't need his approval. She never had. But what she didn't know yet was that the silver-haired woman at his table was already making her way toward her, and that conversation was about to change everything. Lily was still surrounded by her coworkers when she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. She turned around and found herself face to face with the elegant silver-haired woman from Vincent Caldwell's table. Up close, the woman looked even more refined. She had the kind of presence that made you stand up a little straighter without even realizing it. Her eyes were warm but sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen a lot in her life and learned to recognize something special when she saw it. That was extraordinary, the woman said. Her voice was calm and measured, but there was genuine emotion behind it. I've attended concerts at the finest halls in the world, and I can count on one hand the number of performances that moved me the way yours just did. Lily didn't know what to say. She was still trying to catch her breath, still trying to process everything that had just happened. Thank you, she managed. That's very kind of you to say. The woman smiled and reached into her small clutch purse. She pulled out a business card and handed it to Lily. My name is Catherine Joe. I'm the artistic director of the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra. Lily's eyes went wide. She knew that name. Everyone who had ever studied classical music knew that name. The Metropolitan Symphony was one of the most prestigious orchestras in the entire country. They performed for presidents and royalty. They had won countless awards. And this woman was in charge of all of it. I don't understand, Lily said, looking down at the card in her trembling hands. Why are you giving this to me? Catherine tilted her head slightly. Because talent like yours doesn't come along very often, and because I believe that everyone deserves a second chance at their dreams. She paused, studying Lily's face. Something tells me you've been away from music for a while. Am I right? Lily nodded slowly. A few years. Things happened. Life always does, Catherine said gently. But the music never really leaves us, does it? I could see it in your playing. You weren't just performing a piece. You were coming home. Those words hit Lily harder than she expected. Her eyes began to sting, and she had to look away for a moment to compose herself. Catherine gave her time. She didn't rush or push. She simply waited until Lily was ready to meet her gaze again. We have a showcase coming up in 3 months, Catherine continued. It's an event where we feature emerging artists alongside our regular performers. I would like you to audition for a spot. No promises, but based on what I heard tonight, I think you have a very real chance. Lily opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. She was a waitress. She served food for a living. She had given up on her dreams years ago, and yet here was this woman, offering her a door she thought had closed forever. I know it's a lot to take in, Catherine said. You don't have to answer now. Take my card. Think about it. Call me when you're ready. She reached out and gave Lily's hand a gentle squeeze. But please do call. The world needs to hear you play. With that, Catherine turned and walked back toward her table, leaving Lily standing there in stunned silence. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Lily finished her shift on autopilot, her mind racing with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider in years. Her coworkers kept congratulating her, asking her questions about where she had learned to play like that, but she could barely focus on their words. She kept glancing at the business card in her pocket, making sure it was still there, making sure she hadn't imagined the whole thing. Vincent Caldwell left the restaurant shortly after Catherine spoke with Lily. He didn't say anything on his way out. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked quickly toward the exit with his head down, his earlier arrogance completely gone. His guests followed behind him, none of them laughing anymore. But there was one thing Vincent didn't realize until much later that night. His assistant, a young man who had been documenting the evening for social media, had been playing with Vincent's phone during the performance. And when Lily started playing, he had been so captivated that he forgot to stop the recording or put the phone away. Instead, he had accidentally uploaded the entire video to Vincent's public social media account. By midnight, the video had 10,000 views. By morning, it had crossed 1 million. The internet had found its newest story. A waitress at a fancy restaurant. A rich man who mocked her. A piano performance that left everyone speechless. It had all the elements that people loved to share and talk about. Comments poured in from all over the world. People were moved by Lily's playing. They were angry at Vincent for his cruelty. They wanted to know who this mystery woman was and how they could support her. News outlets picked up the story. Entertainment websites wrote articles. Talk shows reached out to the restaurant, trying to book Lily for interviews. And Vincent Caldwell, the man who had tried to humiliate her, became famous for all the wrong reasons. His face was everywhere, frozen in that moment of arrogant mockery, right before Lily proved him wrong. People called him out for his behavior. Business partners distanced themselves. The reputation he had spent decades building took a serious hit. He eventually issued a public apology. Whether it was sincere or just damage control, no one could say for sure. But he admitted that he had been wrong to judge someone based on their job. He said he had learned a valuable lesson about treating people with respect, regardless of their circumstances. Some people forgave him, others didn't. But the conversation he started about how society treats service workers continued long after the news cycle moved on. As for Lily, she did call Catherine Joe. It took her 3 days to work up the courage, but she finally made the call, and 2 weeks later, she walked into the audition room at the Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra headquarters. She was nervous. More nervous than she had been at the restaurant. But she sat down at the grand piano in that room, took a deep breath, and let herself play. 3 months later, she stood on the stage of the city's most famous concert hall, wearing a beautiful black gown instead of a waitress uniform. The seats were filled with people who had come to hear her perform. Some of them had discovered her through the viral video. Others were classical music lovers who had heard about the new rising star. Her mother was sitting in the front row, tears already streaming down her face before Lily even touched the keys. And somewhere in the audience, though Lily didn't know it, Vincent Caldwell sat quietly in a back corner. He had bought a ticket under a different name. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to see, with his own eyes, what happened when you underestimate someone. Lily looked out at the crowd, her heart full of emotions she couldn't even name. Gratitude, disbelief, joy, and something else. Something deeper, peace. She had spent so many years believing her dreams were dead, believing that the life she wanted was forever out of reach. But here she was, exactly where she was meant to be. She thought about her father then, about how he used to tell her that her fingers were magic. She wished he could have been there to see this moment. But somehow, she felt like he was watching anyway. She placed her hands on the keys.